Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. All right, guys, today I've got a very special guest for you on the podcast. His name is Jack CARR. And for a lot of you guys, there's no other introduction that needs to be made. But for those of you who aren't familiar with Jack CARR, he is a professional writer, but also a retired Navy SEAL sniper. He retired as an officer from the Navy SEALs. But his books have gone all over the place, and they've shot to the top of the bestseller list because this year he appeared on the Joe Rogan Experience, basically got a ringing endorsement for his third novel, and then people just started buying up his books left and right. I remember hearing stories about the fact that at one point you could not find a hardback version of its first three books, which are The Terminal List, True Believer, and then Savage Son. So on this podcast today, we certainly talk about his books. We talk about his book that he has coming out next April called The Devil's Hand. It's pre-order right now. It's April the 13th. I'll have all that information for you in the show notes. Obviously, we talked a little bit about the fact that he's a Navy SEAL and how all that's interesting. But with this podcast episode in particular, I didn't want to do the normal Jack CARR interview. Because the normal Jack CARR interview is, hey, let's talk about the books and how do you get your ideas for books? And, oh, wasn't that cool that you made it through buds? And, isn't it cool that you were a sniper? And, oh, man, what about this? Do you like this gun or do you like this knife? All that's cool. And we get into some of that, right? Because I'm frankly interested in that stuff as well. But I wanted to give Jack some latitude to talk about some larger topics. I mean, we all love the EDC stuff. We all love the Navy SEAL stuff in the books. But I wanted to give him a chance to talk about some stuff that he maybe doesn't get to talk about. I've seen a lot of his interviews. I've read a lot of the stuff that's been written about him. And I gave him that latitude today. Asked him some questions about some big topics, about things going on right now in America, things going on societally, culturally, also just the state of manhood overall, his own personal spirituality. And guys, I couldn't have been more excited with how this ended up. He was so gracious, so nice on air and off air. So guys, without further ado, let's get into it. Jack CARR, welcome to Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's great to be here.
I got to tell you, the moment I even hinted at some of the interviews I was going to be doing, some guys were like, dude, have you talked to Jack CARR? Are you going to get Jack CARR? We got to get Jack CARR on here. His books are so awesome. And guys, we're going to get into the books. We're going to get into a lot of his history. But the thing I got to start out with, this is a selfish question just for me. I followed you on Instagram for a long time, and you always post these amazing pictures from what looks to be the coolest living room in the history of anything ever. Is that your actual living room? Is that really what you look at every single day when you're working from home?
That is, but we just moved this week.
No!
So I'm in the process of a move. So there's boxes everywhere. It's total chaos. I'm in this little closet right now trying to figure out the internet connection. But yeah, that was the house. We were there for 3 years. Beautiful spot, beautiful view right there, nestled into the mountains with moose coming by and mule deer coming by. And it was a great spot with an amazing office. But the office did look great, but just on the other side of those doors was complete chaos with family, 3 kids, dog, wife, the rest of it. So although Instagram made it look nice and peaceful, in reality, if I was to turn it into a video and pan outside those doors, total chaos. So yeah, we moved to a place that was a little better set up for the family, and we'll be here for about a year and a half or so while we build one that's even more well suited for our family situation. So
well, very good.
Not a bad spot though.
Not a bad spot. And as long as the views from the next spot are good, maybe we can just take some posterity photos from the place you're at now and we can post them later. But, there's a lot to talk about today, and we're going to go a little bit different than some of the interviews that you've done before. But I think the most appropriate place to start would just be kind of the day that your entire life got flipped upside down. And that's whenever you appear on the Joe Rogan Experience in April of this year. Your life and really your career as an author exploded after that. You were having success. You definitely were having quite a bit of success, but then it just went to another level. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of latitude to, tell our viewers what it was like, when you were contacted by Joe or the show, and kind of what the process was like doing the show, and then obviously what life has looked like thereafter.
Yeah, so it's interesting in that I was really hoping that before the third book came out, actually I was hoping before the first book came out, before the second book came out, and
right,
before the third book came out, that Joe would have me on, that I'd go on something like a Fox and Friends type show, that Chris Pratt would say something because he optioned the rights for the movie before, or series before the first book even hit the shelves. I was hoping like all those things would happen. And none of them happened before that third book came out. And now I am so happy that they didn't, because the third book made the New York Times list, which is a a benchmark for authors. That's pretty important. So it made that because of grassroots word of mouth, because of podcasts like this, because of readers, because of hunters, because of tactical shooters, because of veterans who told a friend and then maybe posted something to their 5 followers or 10 followers or 20,000 followers or 1 million followers, whatever it was. But it was all grassroots word of mouth and modern word of mouth through connecting with people that most of people that I had relationships with before I had an Instagram account or before I was an author, by being around the tactical industry, by wanting my guys to have the best gear possible before we went downrange in the SEAL teams, and that sort of thing. So I had these relationships that were personal to different companies. And as they saw me transition, a lot of them wanted to help. And it was just very cool to see that and to have the book make the New York Times list because of that grassroots effort. So Joe Rogan happened a few weeks after the New York Times list. Chris Pratt posted something a couple of weeks after the New York Times list. I went on Tucker Carlson a couple months after. So all that stuff happened after. And now I am so thankful that they didn't do anything beforehand. And I knew Chris beforehand. I knew Joe beforehand. I'm one of my dear friends with Tucker, but I'm so glad none of those guys had me on or said anything before the book made it on its own. Because now, no one can say, oh, you only because you went on Rogan thing, New York Times list. Well, no, it happened afterwards. So I'm very thankful now that none of that stuff happened beforehand. But it was interesting with Joe. His podcast was very different than a lot of the other ones I've done. I've known him for a few years now through the connection to hunting and all that sort of thing. So we've been out together, we've hunted together. Fantastic guy. And podcast listeners, and I knew this ahead of time, seem to be more audiobook type listeners. And so as soon as I went on Rogan, audiobook, boom, that hit the New York Times list. The first book, boom, that hit the New York Times list. So the audiobook connection to podcast listeners is strong, is a strong one. So that was pretty cool. So it's been a great few years, and right now I finished the 4th novel and I'm working on the scripts for the Amazon series. So it's just doesn't stop.
So you're not busy at all, which is great. So you got all the time in the world with the guys. This is going to be a 4 or 5 hour conversation. So buckle in. So that's just awesome because that's where a lot of guys did see you for the first time. Because I got to be honest, I remember seeing copies of, the Terminal List and True Believer just on people's shelves for people that I follow on Instagram. So it really, the grassroots organic movement hit me as well. And guys, I know we would be remiss if we didn't at least talk about your history in the Navy SEALs. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that because you've talked about that really in a lot of other interviews. But the biggest thing that I did want to get your opinion on and for you to kind of give our listeners is you're a sniper. You were a sniper. You spent a lot of time behind the glass, but there are a lot of misconceptions about what a sniper is in general, but even specifically what a Navy SEAL sniper does. And it's not always, the big Hollywood moments that people might be thinking of. So from your perspective, with all your history with that particular job, what are some of the biggest misconceptions about what a sniper is in general, but even just more specifically a Navy SEAL sniper?
I guess maybe the biggest misconception is that you never miss. And I don't know. I don't know if I want to talk about missing right now. It's not everybody misses in training and in real life, and that's just how it goes. So probably the biggest misconception is that it is a very strong capability, and we are very good at it. All military snipers are very good at it, and they've only gotten a lot better since September 11th, because in the run up to September 11th, really we were using technology and tactics that were developed in the Vietnam War, because that is the last time we were in sustained combat operations. And since that time, there have been flashpoints here and there, like at Desert One, at Grenada, at Panama, at Mogadishu. But those were just, those were the kind of like the one-offs. And we weren't in sustained combat until just after September 11th, 2001. So the technology that's been developed since then, the tactics that have evolved since then. I mean, I've been out for a few years now, and I can only imagine how much better the snipers are now, just what's been developed and those tactics and all of that being incorporated into the training. So those guys are probably pretty good now. My sniper school was in 2000, right after my first platoon. And it was a lot more of the art than the science back then. And today, I'm sure it's a mixture of art and science, but the science piece of it has really come to the forefront. And yeah, it's an incredible capability. But that's something I explore in my novels as well, and what I'll explore in the future is kind of that art versus science piece of sniping. So yeah, biggest misconception is that you never miss, and but yeah, but I don't know if I want to. I don't know if I want to dispel that right now. We don't
Well,
miss much. How about that?
yeah, we'll go with don't miss much, but that is one of the misconceptions, because whenever you read any novels that talk about snipers, or anytime you see one on television, like, oh, the FBI sniper's coming in for the hostage situation, or, there's someone's trying to be Hathcock from Vietnam, and they're trying to do their different things. It does seem like you guys just don't miss, and that you don't make mistakes, which you clearly do, but it is the makes that do make the news and make the headlines as well. The other thing I did want to talk about with your Navy SEAL history, because you've talked about this before. You actually said on Instagram that you've always loathed the SEAL ethos. But you didn't really elaborate, or not really anywhere where I saw. So I do want to give you some latitude to elaborate, if you will, on why you're not a huge fan of the SEAL ethos, but even as it pertains to just what came out a few months ago, which is that the Navy SEALs said that they were going to remove gendered language from the ethos. And then also you subsequently saw President Trump saying that he would oppose those changes. So kind of, tease that out for us a little bit about, some of your issues with the SEAL ethos and where you maybe see it going.
Yeah, so I was going to write a blog post at some point where I could sit down and really put some more thought into it. But the first time I saw that ethos, and I'm going to get the exact date wrong, but let's just say it's 2005-ish, or somewhere around that time frame when they came out with that thing. And they put a bunch of people on an island out at San Clemente Island off the coast of California, and they came up with this ethos, and then they distributed it to the SEAL teams. In the meantime, while we were in the midst of the war, there was a SEAL ethos that was unofficial before then that I have, and I'm pretty sure it was developed in Vietnam, and it's legit. And I'm not going to post it because it's not out there. You can't find it anywhere, so I'm never going to post it. But it's hardcore. And when I read this ethos first, I was like, okay, we're trying to be like the Rangers, although theirs has history to it. They just didn't all of a sudden put a bunch of people in a room and try to come up with a good idea and put it out there to keep guys from getting in trouble, which what it seemed like this was about. But to me, it read like the Dunder Mifflin mission statement. And for those that follow The Office, you can get online there. I think it's in the beginning, and I might get the book wrong, but it might be in one of Malcolm Gladwell's books, or maybe it's in Drive, or the why. Anyway, it's one of those types of books where it puts that out there, and you read it, and you're like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder what company is that from. And then at the end, when you get to the end, after the author talks about it, it's like, this is from Dunder Mifflin from The Office, and it just read like that to me. And so I was kind of like, it just never sat well. It seemed like it was a bunch of senior level people that got together and came up with some good ideas. And in the military, we call it the good idea fairy, that really floats down, usually from on high, not always, but a lot of the time. And they put out this, fairly, kind of innocuous. I don't know. It's kind of like I equate it to, for those that know, and I might get the HK-23, which was, and I don't want to mess up my nomenclature because people do check you these days, but It was the huge HK-45 pistol that came out probably a few years before I came in the military. But by the time I got to my first SEAL team in '97, we had these things, and they were enormous. It was like the Princess Leia blaster from Star Wars, for those that remember that movie. And no one used it after September 11th. As soon as September 11th hit, those things went kind of in the dumpster, I guess, or whatever. They got sent back to HK or sent back to Crane, Indiana, wherever they go. But I never saw one downrange. It was a gigantic pistol, and it was all the good ideas that people had. Hey, we want this, we want this, we want this, we want this. And so HK built it with all those great ideas. And guess what? No one ever used it, to my knowledge anyway, in combat. Because it had all those great ideas, and they just shoved them all in there. So that's kind of what that ethos looked like to me. It was a bunch of people getting together, putting some good ideas together, and making that HK-23 pistol that no one used in real life. And my thought was kind of like, hey, if you need, at this point, someone to tell you to write this out for you, you're probably in the wrong line of work here. So those were my thoughts for the first time I saw it. And so it never sat well with me. And then senior level leaders could always point to that thing anytime anybody got in trouble. Hey, look at the ethos that we just made up 5 minutes ago.
Right.
So it was always seemed like one of those senior level officer and then senior level, super senior level enlisted, not the tactical level guys that are doing the work, but the guys that are sitting in the rooms at the meetings, coming up with those good ideas and then pushing them down to the front lines, not having to live with the consequences of those decisions. So it just never sat well with me for those reasons.
Well, and with that, you see this kind of management by committee, one of those great ideas that come down on high. And then obviously someone had the great idea that we were going to remove the gendered language from the ethos. So since you're not really a big fan of the ethos anyway, would it be fair to say that maybe you don't really care if the gendered language is removed, or do you feel like that's maybe endemic of something bigger?
I'm kind of numb to all of this at this point, especially since this last election and the events of the summer, which is a terrible thing to say, but it's kind of like, yeah, of course they're going to do that. Of course they're going to take this Dunder Mifflin thing and make it even worse. So, because that's what they do. So I don't know. It's just kind of one of those things like, wonderful. We're on that trajectory. I don't see things turning around anytime soon, unfortunately. Does it make us a stronger force, any of that? No, I don't think so. And neither did most of the people to my right and left, at least the ones that I talked to about it back in the day. So to me, it always comes back to, is this going to make us a stronger fighting force? And if that answer is yes, oh, wonderful. And if not, then why are we doing it?
Hey, fair enough. And guys, don't worry. We're going to get way deeper into some of those cultural issues later on in this podcast, but I would be remiss if we had a Jack CARR podcast and didn't talk about the novels. So as most of you guys know at this point, there are the 3 novels you've released so far: The Terminal List, True Believer, and Savage Son. And they are absolutely fantastic. They really are. And this is coming from a guy that I talk about a lot on this podcast. I don't read fiction. I don't do it. It's like my brain doesn't really connect. It's hard for me to keep people straight. It's like I have PTSD from all the Stephen King novels I tried to read back in the day because there's 74 main characters and they live in 17 different planets. And so it's just like I can't really get it. And then you get to the end of the novel and everything just explodes anyway. But then you've got the 4th novel coming out April 13th of 2021, guys. It is available for pre-order. It's called The Devil's Hand. So just in general, without spoiling everything, don't worry, we'll spoil everything after I stop recording. You can just tell me what happens. But what can readers expect from the 4th novel?
Yeah, so I always wanted to explore, because I was thinking about it while I was in. So it's one of these questions I wanted to explore for years, and that I've been thinking of professionally and personally for years. And that is, what has the enemy been learning from us over what is now almost 20 years at war? So essentially, we've been in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we've been in a few other places around the world, and our enemy has been able, the ones that we've been fighting have been able to adapt, and they've adapted, we've adapted. That's part of warfare. But we've had other people watching. We've had China watching. We've had Russia watching. We've had North Korea watching. We've had Iran watching and participating through proxies. And they've been learning. And my thought was, hey, if I was the enemy watching us on the battlefield for these last 20 years, what would I have learned? What would I have incorporated into my battle plan? And so that's really the theme of this next novel here. And I explore that through a bioweapon that, and it's interesting, I was studying bioweapons well before COVID hit. So I started studying these in the fall of this time last year, and started to research, started to talk to people involved in bioweapons research and bioweapon vaccines and that sort of thing, and formulating how I was going to approach this from the enemy's point of view. And then COVID hit. So I was hypersensitive to all of this when COVID hit. And then I thought, then you come up with, now do I need to incorporate COVID into the novel? And different authors are doing different things. And for me, COVID, the civil unrest of the summer, all these things, they've been so front and center in my mind and in many other citizens' minds that I figured I thought, I can't not include this. I can't not incorporate these things into this 4th novel, for a variety of reasons. But so I incorporated that as well, and it worked right into the storyline. So it's so main point is that I got to look at what we've been doing in Iraq and Afghanistan for these last 20 years through the enemy's eyes, and then figure out, hey, what would I do if I wanted to hit us while we were down? And would COVID and would the riots of this past summer, would that accelerate my planning? Would I factor that in as well? And so that's the Devil's Hand coming in April.
Well, hey guys, if that doesn't get you excited to pick that book up, I don't know what will. But again, I think the fact that the first three books are so accessible, and I don't mean that just because you can go and order it on Amazon. I mean literally they're accessible because they're an easy to follow story. You can find yourself in the story somewhere without really ruining anything at different points during the terminal list. And I was listening to it, which by the way, who is it? Ray Porter.
Ray Porter,
yeah, dude, he does
amazing.
an amazing job. He really brings you into the story at different
Such a great
points.
guy too.
Yeah, I mean, at different points listening to the terminal list, I was getting angry. Like while I'm driving in my car, like I'm sad for the main characters. And again, I won't go any further. So guys, if you haven't really started those three books, if you haven't gotten into them, whether you're a reader or an e-reader or, an audiobook person, you can definitely get those done before April of next year. So you can be right in line with the Devil's Hand. But the thing that I'm curious about, and there's a couple of things that really came to mind for me as I'm going through these books, and I guess it leads to this two-part question, is what percentage of James Reese is Jack Carr? And then with that in mind, are you ever planning to retire James Reese? Because there are some novelists that, they just kind of run that person dry, and there's really no other things that they can add. There's no other romantic interest. There's no other, bombs for them to, turn off. But, what percentage are you the main character? And do you see yourself ever letting James Reese go?
Right. So the main character, James Reese, is a prior enlisted Navy SEAL sniper, which I was. He becomes an officer at some point, which I did. And then when the reader meets him in the first novel, he is on his last deployment to Afghanistan. And he's coming home, and he knows that after this deployment, he's going to hang it up because this is the last time that he's going to tactically maneuver guys on the battlefield again. And that was my last deployment. And it might happen to be to Iraq. But I knew that was going to be the last deployment where I would tactically maneuver guys on the battlefield. After that, yes, you're a quote unquote leader in the military, but you're not out front. You're not kicking the doors in with the guys. And the guys don't want you out there at that point. So even though you would be a team CO, commanding officer, you'd be back in the tactical operations center. You're allocating assets. You're doing that sort of thing. You're not out there in the front. And I knew that's what I came in to do. I came in to fight. I came in to lead. And I knew that after the last deployment to Iraq that my family needed me. So it was time to get out and take care of my family. So those things are all very closely tied to the main character. Now, of course, he is a much better shot than I am. He is much better at jujitsu than I am. He is much faster, much stronger, much wittier. All these things. He drives the same vehicle I do. He likes a 1988 Land Cruiser,
Right.
which is in my driveway. So there are some similarities there, and it helps because I don't have to go and find a sniper and talk to him about what it was like in Ramadi 2005, 2006, and then filter that interview or what I think I learned from that interview through whatever biases I have through my life experience, and then apply it to a fictional character on the written page. I don't have to do that. And I can remember what it was like to go into Ramadi in 05 and 06 and set up cyber positions and do all that sort of thing. And then I can apply that to a completely fictional narrative. And I think that's what really made the book stand out to Simon & Schuster, who sees thousands of these things every year. The terminal list stood out to them. And I think it's because I took those experiences from Iraq and Afghanistan primarily and applied not the exact experience, but the emotion and the feelings behind those experiences to a completely fictional narrative. So as someone's reading it, the emotions read raw, authentic, and real. And that's because they they come from a real place. It's not me interviewing somebody and being like, man, that sounds amazing. What I'm going to apply that to this narrative, this character that I'm writing. No, it's what it was like in those places, but it's just applied to this fictional narrative. So I think that made it stand out. And then will I ever retire James Reese? We will see. I have a lot of ideas. So when I first sat down to start the first novel, I wrote 6, 7, 8 different ideas down on like one-page executive summaries, essentially. So some were a paragraph, some were 2 paragraphs, some were a full page, but it would be like reading the back flap jacket of a book. Like, what is this book about? What's that general theme? And then I looked at all those and I chose the terminal list because it was just a visceral story of revenge. And those always appealed to me, both watching films and reading growing up. So that's the one that I knew I had to start with. That's how I knew I needed to introduce James Reese to the reader, was through that story. But those other other ones that I had written down, there's other 6, 7, 8 different ideas. Those are morphing into the next novel. So I don't think that I'll ever not be able to come up with an idea, or there's so many different ideas, so many different things I want to explore through this character who has a similar background to mine. I don't see myself retiring him anytime soon, but hey, you never know. You never know.
Hey, that's music to all of our ears because we don't want to see James Reese go away. But one thing I did want to hop on before we go on to other topics is you mentioned earlier that Chris Pratt, he has signed on and he has bought the rights. They're going to be making the Terminal List an Amazon show. It's going to be something that's coming out. But the problem for me as a fan and all the other fans is as soon as that information came out, everybody was excited. We're like, this is going to be so great. And then we haven't heard any other information. And I don't know if that's because of COVID or there were delays of some kind. So we want to know when we're going to be seeing Chris Pratt behind the glass on Amazon.
Well, it's all that stuff is classified. I have the 7th episode right here, so I'm working on the scripts. So scripts are it's an 8-episode series, and someone sent me a screenshot of I think it's called a casting call. I'm not exactly sure. I'm still new to all this, but for all the other parts. So I think that went out yesterday. Or at least maybe a couple of days ago. Maybe it was an older screenshot, but they're just starting to cast the other characters right now. So sometime in the first part of 2021, I don't think I can get in trouble for saying that, filming should start, and then it should come out sometime after that. So we shall see. But it can always derail. I always keep my expectations low, although it's looking great. Chris optioned it before the first book even hit shelves, and he's super fired up. He just called the other day, and we were talking about it because now he's shifted in his mind. He finished up Jurassic, this last part of movie, Jurassic Park, and now he shifted focus to get ready for the Terminal List. So he's going to get in shape. He's going to learn to shoot. He's going to learn the blade work. He's going to be rolling, doing the jiu-jitsu, and get ready to become James Reese in this series. So he's super fired up, and it was awesome to talk to him and just sense that the switch has flipped, and he's now focused on this project. So it's awesome.
Very good. Well, there you go, guys. There's your update. We're going to move on to some larger topics, but before we get there, it'd be kind of silly if I didn't ask you about your everyday carry, your EDC.
So EDC, yeah. So I if you follow me on Instagram, you'll notice that I do have quite a few blades and more than a couple firearms. I don't typically like to show all of them, but you'd be safe to assume that I have more than one. But for my everyday carry, I do like things right out of the box. I have plenty of pistols that are super tricked out, from Terran Tactical and Zev and a bunch of 1911 gunsmiths and that sort of thing. But I'll tell you, I do really like knowing that right out of the box. I like knowing all that research, all that testing that went in to these pistols, and maybe I switch out the sights, something like that. But even though I have a bunch of stuff that's super tricked out, I do like to carry an out of the box 365, and they have great sights coming right out of the box. With a Glock, like I had a Glock 43 right when that came out, and of course you got to switch out the Glock sights immediately. But yeah, right now it's if I want something a little a little beefier, then yeah, that Sig 320 X Compact is the one that I go with. But I do that in a Black Point Tactical holster. I love their mini wing. Has these little leather flaps on the side, so it kind of contorts to your body a little bit better. And so that's the pistol. And then I have a couple different knives I go with. I have one that I use to opening boxes and cutting cardboard and all that sort of thing. And that changes depending on what I grab, what drawer I open as I'm trying to get out of the house and juggle the kids and make sure the dog's gone out right before we leave, whatever, just like everybody else. And then the two fixed blades that I really like these days are the Dynamis blade, and that one goes in appendix carry, and then the Amtac blade, the Northman, by my friend Bill Rapier. Both of those are Seal design knives, and I really like this Amtac lately because it can go in my pocket, and I have these Dynamis jeans that have another spot for it. So when I'm putting my hands in my pockets, I'm not raking my hand across this this thing that's in my pocket that is scratching my hand as it comes out, or it's uncomfortable or whatever. There's another spot for it right there on my side, so it's right there. And it's the clips. The clips are great these days. They're amazing both on holsters and for blades. So that's pretty much what I'm leaving. What I'm what I grab when I leave the house, other than the phone and the wallet, of course. But one fixed blade, one blade for opening packages. That's a folder, and then that 365 these days, or the X Compact.
Very good. I do want to get into something because you brought it up a few times. You've alluded to it in this conversation. It's just the unrest that we saw as a country and really just as a people this summer. And so you had the racial unrest after the killing of George Floyd. You've had just overall societal upheaval. And then you had all the drama that was brought along with COVID and the presidential election, which were kind of technically passed, but not quite yet as of this exact moment. You had the defund the police movement. You had all these things happen. But from your perspective, seeing what you've seen in other countries and just being an American for as long as you've been an American, what's kind of your read on this summer and really the fall that we've had as a country and maybe what it's done to us as a people?
Yeah, so I mean, the first word that comes to mind when you ask that question is it's been heartbreaking to watch. Um, it's tough because you're seeing different segments of society that want to take rights away, that people died, people came back missing arms and limbs, people came back completely changed because of the physical and emotional trauma of the battlefield, um, from the inception of this country up through today. And it seems like sections of this country just want to throw that aside and haven't really put the requisite thought into what that means and to what those people sacrificed so that we could have the freedoms and the options and the opportunities that we all have today. It's so for me, it's heartbreaking to see that as a student of history, citizen of this country who's put in as much time as I can and continue to study how we got here as a nation, what people sacrificed along the way, some of the reasons we have some of the rights that we have, understanding that they don't come from the government. The government doesn't grant any of these to us. They're the people that work in government are our employees. We elect them, and they just get more and more powerful day by day, crisis by crisis, and they never give it back. So for me, it's been heartbreaking to watch all that, especially knowing what people have sacrificed and to have seen people sacrifice everything on the battlefield in defense of this country, in defense of freedom. And so it's tough to watch. And I think about my kids. What are they learning from this? Because when I grew up, it was the formative news or the events were things that I naturally gravitated to and wanted to know more about anyway. I wanted to know about the Iranian hostage crisis. When I saw that, I saw Walter Cronkite on our TV. I saw the front page of the newspaper every morning. Then we had a string of terrorist events through the 80s. That's really my formative time growing up. And you had Time and Newsweek, primarily in our house, and you'd see a hijacked plane on the front of that, or you'd see a Grenada, and I naturally gravitated towards these things and read about them. Marine barracks bombing, of course, all these different events that really formed and impacted me. And I think, gosh, what are my kids learning? They're at the same age that I was in the 80s, and what are they getting by seeing it now? Of course, I saw a newspaper. I saw a 5-minute segment on a half-hour news program in the evening, and then the TV changed. I saw a magazine or newspaper. So they're seeing it all the time, and we're guilty of this. We have the TV going in the house, and we're watching the news, and they're getting bombarded with things on their social media. Our daughter is old enough to have a phone, and that's how she communicates with her friends. It's through these. It's not even texting. It's through these social apps. It's a very strange thing, but that's the world we live in today. So I can only imagine what they're getting bombarded with, and I'm just curious what it's doing to them. Seeing the summer of every night of rioting and seeing it portrayed in one way by one segment and another way by another segment of the population, and by news media that's very powerful, by tech companies, by tech oligarchs that are very powerful. So I do wonder about that, and I do think about that quite often. And I don't know how it's affecting them. And so for us, we try to get outside as much as we can. We try to put all these devices down and get out hunting. We try to get out to at least one river trip a year when you're in the bottom of River Canyon, when you can't be, there's no cell signal. You're not getting any Wi-Fi. So there's no excuse to even check on a device. So, but it's tough. It's tough. I don't know what all that's doing to these kids. That's something I think about a lot.
Well, let's talk about that even a little bit further, because one of the refreshing things from your Instagram is you do these history lessons and you'll talk about things that have happened that aren't really taught in school, or a lot of schools that maybe I attended. But you look at the education system right now in America, and there are kids that are growing up in K through 12 schools not learning about the Holocaust. They're not knowing or understanding the dangers of socialism or communism and those ideologies. And so, for you as a parent, but also just as an American, does that concern you at all? Like, where do you see this going? Because everyone likes to talk about how divided we are, but we're super divided ideologically, and it's along some of those lines. And kids just aren't learning it. They're having to learn it from YouTube videos of Jordan Peterson, or reading the Gulag Archipelago. But where do you see this going for us?
Right. I mean, parents have to take an active role in this, and it's tough because you're competing with a school system. You're competing with social media platforms that can feed you certain things. You're competing with a Google search that can put something at the top of that search as these kids are doing their research for certain things. And it started well before this, but my first exposure to some of this was in my high school reading, and I might mess up the exact title, but I think it's A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn.
Yep.
So that one came in and I was like, what on earth is this? And I'm like, well, some of this is semi interesting here, but let me do a little more research. So I guess, I guess I liked that it was something maybe a little different, but then I was like, wait a second. It was also a warning. It was also like, okay, I see what's going on here. So I guess I'm glad I was exposed to it, but I also had the wherewithal to realize what it was even back then, and to be able to do my own research. My mom was a librarian, so I grew up surrounded by books and a love of reading. So I could go to the library, I could research these things. I had a foundation already. My grandfather was killed in World War II, so I had this personal connection to service and to sacrifice through that example that he gave to me, just through the pictures of him with his squadron and his medals and his the silk maps they gave aviators back then, that sort of thing. So I had this tie to that, and I was always interested in unconventional warfare, in terrorism, in warfare, in the founding of this country. What made this group of people think they could rise up against the most powerful military the earth had ever seen at that point? And so all those things kind of gave me a foundation from which to read Zinn and not be like, oh, okay, just accept it at face value, write a paper, and move on to my next class. I realized what it was even back then. But so today, I think parents need to take a very active role in this, and they need to be aware of what their kids are learning, particularly in history and social studies, quote unquote, and be able to counter some of that at home, being able to point kids in the right direction of maybe some other books, some other places where they can get information that isn't tainted by that kind of ideology that makes us all want to feel guilty about what we've done and what we've accomplished as a country. So I do think about that quite a bit as well.
When that leads to just dads being engaged, doesn't it? I mean, because if you're a dad that's disengaged, you're not understanding and you're not communicating with your kids, so you don't know what they're being taught at school. You don't know ways that you can counteract some of those silly ideologies that they might be getting from a teacher or something like that. But I think that this overall speaks to the current state of manhood in America. Even just yesterday, I was watching this clip from a new HBO documentary about trans kids, and there's this mom that's basically telling their young son who's manifesting as a girl at the moment, kind of what they're going to do and how they're going to go out and talk about his transgenderism. And the dad is just sitting there the whole time, and this kid is complaining he doesn't want to do it. And I'm just sitting there and I'm just like, all I can do is focus on the dad. The clip is meant to focus on mom and the child, but dad's just sitting there silent. And there's so many silent men that are standing by and allowing these things to happen because they're either disengaged or they've just become super beta. They've lost their nuts, however you want to say it. But from your perspective, seeing what you've seen, being in the hyper masculine world of, the military and the Navy SEALs, what do you think the state of manhood in America is right now?
Yeah, so I don't really think of it in those terms. I think of it more at the tactical level. Maybe I should elevate that to the operational or strategic level. But for us, it's all about who you surround yourself with and what your kids are seeing. Well, for us anyway, like, well, how do I treat my wife? Do I open the door for her when she comes? Do I stand up for a woman when she walks in the room? Those things that we grew up learning. Now, when we get outside, uh, we got our daughter outside very early, got her out hunting very early. And luckily, she expressed an interest. So it wasn't me pulling her to hunting camp or anything like that. She just really expressed an interest. And I was like, yes, let's go. Let's do this. So she started shooting very early. She got her first deer at age 7. She has a couple elk now. We've all been to Africa together. But in those early experiences outside at hunting camp, she got to see men being men. She got to learn how to handle a firearm properly. She got to learn a little about the history of that firearm, why we have these rights, and that personal responsibility, that independence that comes with being around firearms, going outside, putting a bullet into a living, breathing animal, and then taking that meat and putting it in the freezer and then sharing it with a family. So I think those things are very important, because it's not you just sitting your kids on the couch and telling them something and then they run back off to their game. Like, I don't think that, I mean, it might help a tiny bit, but it's not moving the needle. There's just so many other inputs these days, but what does move the needle is putting these things down, getting out there, getting outside, being around other people, and they get to see, this is what this is how this is what happens when the 4-wheeler runs out of gas when you're 2 miles down the road, or this is what happens when you don't care for it and you come back to it after 6 months of it's not being used, and this is what you do. And this is what happens when you wound an animal. This is how you track it, and this is why you train with that firearm, and you know your limitations, you know your capabilities with that firearm, because that's what you owe to this animal. So it's really about that primal nature, that foundational, that base, that all of us, we've only been able to survive without being good fighters and good hunters for a very small portion of human history, the tiniest portion of human history. Up until this point, up until this sliver that we live in now, you had to be a good fighter, you had to be a good hunter, or your family wouldn't eat, your tribe wouldn't eat, and guess what? Your whole tribe would die because another tribe would overrun yours. So I think going back to those roots and having a connection to the land, having a connection to the food on your table, I think for both men and women, for girls and boys as they're growing up, I think that's there's something about that really you can't replicate anywhere else. You can't replicate just by handing them a book and hope they read it, or by turning on a half-hour show and hoping they won't be distracted and hoping they'll take those lessons to heart before they run back to their room or go outside and play soccer or whatever. It's really about immersing yourself outside in that environment. But there's a difference between just going on a hike, going rock climbing, going ice climbing, mountaineering, backpacking, which are all wonderful things. But there's a difference between going out and doing those types of things with a firearm, with a bow, and then with the goal of bringing meat back to feed your family. There's just something different about that.
That's great. And I love the way that you framed that. And before we move on to the last section of the podcast here, I noticed something that you said a little bit earlier. You talked about how the government, the United States government specifically, they did not come up with these rights. They don't grant us these rights. They basically can build a structure that acknowledges them. So obviously, when people normally bring that up, they bring it up in some sort of a Judeo-Christian context, in a creator type context. But one thing that I haven't heard you speak about very much is your own personal faith. It's not really something that comes out in the novels either. But again, you're Jack Carr, you're not James Reese. But in terms of your personal faith, what is it that you believe that you would like to share with our audience here in terms of, why we're all here, the reason for everything, how we got here to begin with? Where would you say you land on all that?
Yeah, so you're right. I don't talk about it too often. It does come up every now and again, but I have a King James Version Bible right here next to me because we're in the move. We have boxes everywhere, but that was something that was given to me by my great grandmother, and it's right here next to me. It's something that it didn't just go in a box. It it came with me. So, and we have a bigger family Bible out in the front room, but so I did grow up that way. I did grow up going to church with my family, going to Sunday school with my family, and man, those lessons that you learn from those stories, they're important. They're not just important in a religious sense. They're important in a historical context, to be able to move through this world and be able to go back to those stories, to those lessons, to be able to discuss them with other people, have them as a common touch point. And I guess a good example of that is, so I went to Buds and went through Hell Week in 1997. guess what? I have something in common with somebody that went through Buds and Hell Week in 1967, in 1977, and we'll go through next week, that sort of thing. So to have something, to have a common story, a common heritage that we can all link back to, we can all reference, is makes us a stronger country, a stronger citizenry. And we're definitely losing that over time. And it's being replaced by things like the religion of climate change, maybe, or something along those lines. Something that isn't really a religion, isn't really a faith, isn't doesn't have a foundation in stories that have a lesson attached to them, that is designed to make us better people and to make us be able to get along with others. Golden rule. I mean, my goodness, treat others as you'd like to be treated. And social media only makes that worse. It's
Right.
just, I think about that almost daily when I see people that have to be mean, negative, and nasty to each other on social media, totally unnecessarily, and probably using time that should be spent allocated elsewhere, using bandwidth that could be focused in a positive direction. Instead, they choose to take that time, take that energy, take that very limited bandwidth that they only have so much of, and we don't know how many days we're going to have on this earth, and they decide to be mean and nasty unnecessarily to someone that they don't even know on social media. It's actually fascinating to me, and I'll probably explore it in future novels.
Yeah, it's fascinating and terrifying all at the same time. But as long as you realize that's not something that anyone would ever say to their face, you can kind of deal with it a little bit better. But I definitely appreciate that perspective. And we're going to be wrapping this interview up here very soon because I know you got to go to another one of these interviews here in just a second. But we got one more segment left for you. It's called What Would You Say to Someone That Said? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that, and then I'm going to give you some sort of a topic, and you've got, 15 seconds, 30 seconds maximum to just give me the meat and potatoes answer, regardless of if it has a lot more nuance, because I guarantee you it will. But it's just, we want to get the right off the top of the head responses to some of these things. So what would you say to someone that said? You think you're up for it?
So I'm up for it, but I'm going to tell you that I'm an author because I am not good at things like this, because I can sleep on them. I can think of them. I can think about the best thing you could possibly say in this certain situation. And that might take a month to figure out. It certainly isn't off the cuff. So we'll see how it goes here.
Well,
And also I've learned I need to take a breath when I see something on social media, like we just talked about. It's much better to take a breath and not respond and come back to it a day later and be kind.
Well, we're all about making people uncomfortable and stretching you just a hair. So I think you'll do okay. Your buddy Steven Pressfield did all right with it. So I feel like you could do at least as good as he did. So
All right.
here we go. Let's launch in. What would you say to someone that said, I don't want my kids to be in special operations?
I understand it. I definitely understand that perspective as a parent, no doubt about it. So I would say I understand that. But like with all the things we don't want our kids to do, it's probably not going to help if we try to keep them out.
Right. All right. Next rapid fire question here. What would you say to someone that said, I don't need to read anymore. I'm not in school.
Ugh. That's all I can say.
That's a common one.
That's horrible. I just gotta shake my head at that one. But hey, to each their own, to each their own. But I would encourage people to read regardless of what it is, just because it's you'll probably lead a richer, fuller life. And by that, I don't mean in the monetary sense.
Absolutely. And if you wanted to start with something, start with the Terminalist and then just go from there.
That's a great place to start.
There you go. There's your plug. What would you say to someone that said the USA needs a viable third political party?
Oh man, they might be right. That's such a tough one because we're so ingrained in these two different parties, and one, and now they're so ideologically opposed to one another that I would say there may be a time and a place for that.
All right, next one here. What would you say to someone that said the United States of America will have a second civil war?
I would say study your history.
Fair enough. I love it. What would you say to someone that said there is no place for social justice in the United States military?
I would say that, social justice in the United States military. Yeah, it's probably not a good place to experiment with these things. Does it make us stronger as a nation, as a military, as a fighting force? And if the answer is no, then get it out of there.
All right, just a few more left. What would you say to someone that said the Biden administration will be terrible for our foreign policy and military?
Oh, geez.
I'm trying to get you in trouble. All right, so let's just go ahead and wade into it.
Yeah, I'd say I'm numb to all this at this point, and I would probably, yeah, roll my eyes and we shall see. Yeah, we're so diametrically opposed right now. It's tough to watch, but we shall see.
All right, two more left. What would you say to someone that said, I feel like I'm supposed to write a book, but I don't know where to start?
At the beginning, just do it. Just like eat an elephant one bite at a time. So yeah, it's not going to get done without you sitting down and doing the work.
Last question of the day. What would you say to someone that said, I don't need to learn how to protect myself. That's what the police and military are for?
I would say watch the news over the past few months. Watch the news of the summer. That's a tough one when you hear that, because it seems so obvious, and it is tough for me because it's so obvious to me. I don't understand how someone would not want to protect that gift of life, and to rely on someone else, and then rely on someone else's goodwill. And by someone else's goodwill, I mean the enemy's will. I mean a criminal's will, not to hurt you. Once again, it goes back to our responsibility as leaders, as fathers, as men, to be able to defend ourselves and our families. That is our primary responsibility. So when someone says that, I don't even know how to respond.
Well, that is a great way to end this, Jack. We have talked about a lot of different things in this podcast. We went over everything, but that is all for me. Is there anything else you want to get off your chest?
Oh, thank you so much. I got like 3 minutes till I need to get to my next thing. But yeah, people can follow me on Jack CARR USA on the social channels. And then there's some merchandise out there that I send 100% of the proceeds to the charitable foundations that are highlighted on my site. And they are all veteran-focused organizations where I have a personal touch point. So it's not just a foundation that had a nice website. It's someplace that helped a friend of mine. And I send all that there. So that's at jackcarrusa.com. So that is it. But I want to thank everybody for all their support. That's for sure. Because as we talked about earlier, this was all a grassroots effort, and I sincerely appreciate it. I'll never forget it.
All right, guys, I'll make sure all those links are in the show notes. But Jack CARR, thanks for coming on Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on. Let's do it again sometime.
Will do. There you go, guys. Thanks so much for listening to this interview. And I just got to give a special shout out here at the end of this episode. I meant to say it at the beginning, but Steven Pressfield, thank you so much. For those of you guys, you've listened to the episode that I did with Steven Pressfield. You're familiar with his books, but he is very good friends with Jack CARR. I think we even talked about Jack on the podcast interview I did with Steven, but he was integral in getting me connected with Jack. And he connected me while he was writing The Devil's Hand. And so he was literally in the thick of it, in the thick of editing and all the things he was doing, trying to get that fourth novel out to you guys. But Steven was able to kind of help get me through everything to get this interview done. So big shout out to Steven Pressfield. I really appreciate it. And guys, don't worry. Got some special things coming up for Steven Pressfield at the beginning of the year. So be on the lookout for that. But before we let you go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost. As you know by now, we are a men's ministry and our mission is cultivating manly resilience. Specifically, we do that by providing you content like this podcast that helps you forge spiritual, mental, and physical toughness. So for today, here are the links I got for you. I got a link to Jack CARR's website. So if you want to go and buy any of the stuff he was talking about there at the end, you want to find a way to buy his books, you want to follow him on social media, that is a great place to go. That kind of gets you to all those different areas. Then I've also got the YouTube video of his interview on the Joe Rogan Experience. That was Joe Rogan Experience 1467. That link is here. And the last one is an article that I didn't really get time to talk to him about, but it was an article that he wrote for Town Hall. I think it's a conservative kind of think tank website, but it's called Our Obligation to Fight. And considering where we are in our society, considering where we are with a lot of things around self-defense, and I know some people are really worried that if Joe Biden is actually going to take over the White House, he's signaled about Beto O'Rourke maybe being his gun czar, and he's talked about all these different things, but it's going to be an interesting time for Second Amendment lovers like Jack CARR, myself, and a lot of you guys listening to this. So I think that's a really important article for you, but it even goes way past guns, way past the Second Amendment, just to the whole concept of us taking care of ourselves, the whole concept of us protecting ourselves, and how a lot of these politicians that are walking around with, six-figure security guards all day, every day that are armed. It's interesting that they're telling us how and when we can use our firearms. So anyway, that's a good one to check out. So I've got that for you here. Guys, thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I really do appreciate it. If you would, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or Stitcher, and refer your friends to listen and share this on social media. Guys, if we deserve a 5-star review, please take the time to leave us 5 stars and a few sentences letting us know why you like the content. I'm currently booking speaking engagements for all of 2021, so if you want me to come speak at your men's event, on your podcast, at your whatever, at your team, it doesn't matter, hit me up, info@Undaunted.Life. That's INFO at Undaunted.Life. Our website is www.Undaunted.Life. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Undaunted.Life or Facebook.com/Undaunted.Life. Check out our free devotionals on the YouVersion Bible app. Just search Undaunted.Life under plans. And as always, we want to thank the band August Burns Red for allowing us to use their entire music library for our content. The intro-outro track on this podcast is our song Defender, which is off their latest record entitled Guardians. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep cultivating manly resilience. Keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical toughness. Keep seeking the Lion of